do it that way.
But look at where we are, Jay, right? I mean, now we're in a shutdown. People aren't getting paid. We need leadership. We need compromise. I mean, doesn't it stand to reason that if you do nothing, we're going to just wind up watching these people's lives get compromised?
Chris, the president has compromised. He has had a budget on the table since the beginning of the year in which he has offered, real tough choices for a Democratic president, to the consternation, in some cases, of his own party. What we haven't seen from Republicans is a commensurate willingness to compromise or move forward, although the president all year long has had fruitful discussions with lawmakers, Republican lawmakers, especially in the Senate, who have been interested in the idea of finding common ground. But again, when you talk about compromise, if the president were behaving the way Republicans were, he might say, you know what, I won't sign a bill keeping the government open unless Republicans agree to extend background checks on gun sales, because that's a priority of his. Or I won't sign a bill to pay our bills to prevent us from defaulting unless I get some other priority of mine that I couldn't get through the normal process.
But isn't he doing...
And instead, he is showing compromise by saying, you know what, I'm not asking for anything when it comes to Congress doing its job, which is to pay the bills of the government and ensure the government remains open.
But isn't he flexing his muscle by saying, I'm not going to put anything on this bill, you fund the government, then we'll talk, and by refusing any compromise is helping push us into the shutdown?
Chris, I don't understand. Look, if you're talking about a bill where if the Republicans can say, basically defund or delay a major piece of domestic legislation that they could not achieve legislatively, they could not achieve at the ballot box, and in return for that, we'll fund the government for 45 days. And then we'll come back in 45 days and say, you know what, we want to take away a woman's right to get access to contraception through her health care plans. We're going to give that authority to her boss instead of herself. And then, the next time we're going to ask for something else. All these agenda items, these ideologically driven agenda items that have nothing to do with the responsibility of Congress to fund government, and certainly nothing to do with Congress's responsibility to ensure that the United States does not default for the first time in history.
Listen, I get it.
The president has been willing all year long. Here's the thing when it comes to compromise. Last year, at the end of the year, when we had a budget negotiations over the so-called fiscal cliff, the main thing that Republicans extracted from Democrats and the president, they said, was the promise that the Senate would pass a budget, because they complained bitterly that the Senate, under control of the Democrats, had not passed a budget the way that the House had under control of the Republicans. And so what happened? Democrats agreed to do that. Democrats passed a budget in the Senate. The House passed their budget. Democrats were ready to return to regular order, which is what House Republican leaders said they wanted, to negotiate over a budget. But guess what happened? When they got what they wanted, Republicans refused to conference on that budget. They refused to sit down and negotiate. So, we've operated in good faith here.
Right,
and
but Jay,
the price of this extremism is being exacted from the American people and the American economy.
But they're not crazy about the Affordable Care Act either.
Fine.
They don't understand it.
Fine.
That's the tricky thing about leadership, though, Jay. I mean, I get that it's difficult, but I mean, that's the part of being president, which is why only one person gets the job. I mean, you have to find a better way, don't you?
Chris, they don't like the Affordable Care Act, and they ought to try to change it any way they can or repeal it any way they can. And in fact, in the House, they've done that now 42 times.
Right.
The fact that the American people decided to re-elect President Obama last year when his opponent ran very strongly against the Affordable Care Act, I think reaffirms and validates the fact that Congress passed it, the fact that the Supreme Court upheld it, and the fact that today, despite everything that's happening on Capitol Hill, Americans across the country have the opportunity to enroll and get access to affordable health insurance that they've never had before.
I get that tying the shutdown to the Affordable Care Act is unusual in terms of politics and unacceptable to the people who are being punished. There's no question about that. Here's my concern. Now we're looking at the debt ceiling. D.C. can't fix what they break with the debt ceiling because the markets are going to respond. You know the dominoes that fall there. So that's the question about leadership. What are you doing down there to strategize for going forward? Because this isn't working, and that fight matters.
And on behalf of the country, on behalf of the economy, and on behalf of every future president, no matter what his or her party, the president refuses to have the full faith and credit of the United States held hostage by a faction within one party, of one house, of one branch of government. He is saying Congress must raise the debt ceiling. I will sign a bill that has Congress raising the debt ceiling without asking for any concessions on my part. What Republicans are saying they'll do, and what we're seeing with the government shutdown is simply a preview of what they're threatening to do with the debt ceiling, is that they will allow the United States to default with all the terrible consequences that you just mentioned, unless they get what they want, unless they get what they couldn't get at the ballot box, what they couldn't get through Congress, and what they couldn't get from the Supreme Court. The consequences of that would be catastrophic. Financial experts would know better than I, but you're talking about a situation where the bedrock economy in the global system, the United States economy, would suddenly be cast in doubt. And so much of the world economy depends on the stability of the American system that default would make what's happening now under the shutdown pale by comparison.
Jay Carney, thank you for taking the opportunity. I guess to paraphrase the president, we're hoping that from a leadership perspective, he opens the fist a little bit and starts reaching out his hand to the other side so we can avoid crisis.
Hey, Chris, I just have to say, I cannot let you in on that. The president is ready to sit down with the Republicans as he has all year long. What he won't do is let Republicans hold the American people hostage in return for their ideological demands. That would be irresponsible, and that would be the opposite of leadership.
White House gets the last word. Jay Carney, thank you very much for coming on New Day. Appreciate it.